Chosen one, you were guided here for a reason. Not everyone was meant to receive this. This isn't the kind of message you scroll past. It was placed here for you by something that's been waiting for you to finally see it. Today you'll see how your quiet mind just exposed a hidden agenda, and why what they build on lies is unraveling. What if I told you their confusion is the signal of your inevitable breakthrough? You felt the stillness inside you, that place where most people heard silence and labeled it absence. The truth is deeper. Your silence was seeing, your restraint was scanning, and your presence has been a kind of unspoken threat to systems built on spectacle and borrowed authority. They assumed you were slow, simple, or pliable. They never imagined you were 5 steps ahead because you weren't playing their game. You were reading its hidden code, letting them reveal themselves while you positioned quietly. You've lived in rooms where energy shifted the moment you entered and people acted without naming why, because your alignment made their constructed wheels creak. This is not theory. These are confirmations. If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. Stay with what's coming, because what they thought was an unnoticed mind is the engine that's now exposing their agenda. Act before they recover. Number 1, source of your ancestral insight. The first layer of your power is not something you learned. It is something remembered. There is a difference between knowledge acquired and a knowing that surfaces like a spring from deep within. You have been carrying ancestral intelligence that shows up as clarity in moments others call intuition or luck. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, and your insight draws them out from below the surface. Proverbs 20 verse 5 is not a nice line. It's a description of the mechanism you've been given. They try to copy what they see on the outside, but that's like trying to mimic a river by studying its ripples instead of the source. You feel motives before they're spoken, sense shifts in energy before words are formed, and when you act, it lands with precision that leaves them scrambling for explanations. Their attempt to decode you only highlights the fact that they are chasing shadows while you move with the weight of ancient currents. Your quiet strategy, your slow reveal, wasn't a flaw in timing. It was a way the remembrance activated, precise, patient, unavoidable. Comment insight if your clarity feels inherited more than earned. They will keep wondering how you see. But what comes next is a way you use that inherited sight to pull back their curtain without so much as announcing it. I remember the moment like a soft echo, as if a half-forgotten dream slid into waking and rearranged the colors of everything you've been living. You might not have named it at first. Perhaps it came as a morning when a phrase from childhood resurfaced with clarity, or a quiet pause in the middle of a crowded room that felt less like withdrawal and more like recognition. That internal shift wasn't dramatic. It was like the gentle settling of a lens coming into focus. The images of a river under ice, still and frozen to most eyes, yet with a current moving patiently underneath. What others saw as silence was actually flow, and now the ice is beginning to thin enough for you to feel the rhythm beneath. There's an old voice inside you, not new advice, but remembrance, asking in that familiar yet distant tone. Did you think the strange years of waiting were wasted? This is the opening of awareness, the turning point where the quiet thread you've carried starts to align with something much larger than circumstance. It feels like coming home to a part of yourself that never left, only waited for you to finally see it was there. There were times you felt like the odd one out in rooms full of people pretending certainty, carrying questions that seemed too heavy to voice. You noticed patterns without being able to name their source, felt energy shifts in conversations that left you drained or wary, and experienced a kind of grief for something unnamed, lost not a people, but belonging to a version of life that never matched the internal compass you felt beating beneath everything. You were told to tone it down, to play along, to soften the parts of you that registered deception before words formed, to swallow the sting of being misunderstood because it was easier than being labeled difficult. The isolation of being the one who sensed what others ignore became a quiet ache, one that made you second-guess the depth of your sensitivity or the validity of the messages that arrived uninvited in dreams, flashes, and gut pulls. You felt different, not in a rising, performative way, but in a way an old tree feels its roots pushing through hidden soil, knowing the ground holds unseen support even when storms make the surface shake. That tension, that gap between your inner knowing and the external validation everyone else chased, created a strange waiting room. And in that waiting, the foundation of something ancestral was being laid, unseen by those who only measure with eyes on surface. It's time to reframe those years of disconnect not as misfire or mistake, but as the quiet shaping of an inheritance. The currents beneath your life were never random. They were designed. There is a biblical echo to this. Long before the world saw your movement, the blueprint was established in a space where silence held covenant. Think of the way the deep waters carry hidden treasures. The heart's purposes are deep waters, and one with insight draws them out. That is not a metaphor for elite intellect. It is a spiritual description of how your clarity works. It does not come from surface education or loud affirmation. It wells up from the reservoir of something older. Your internal logic has been tuned to patterns that predate the noise around you, and what has felt like instinct was the imprint of ancestral alignment resurfacing to guide you. The architecture of your path was built in quiet layers. The moments you were pushed aside, the corners where you chose isolation instead of pretense, the times you heard warnings and didn't act because the timing was not yet yours. All of it was sacred calibration. This is not simply a shift in understanding. It is a recognition that you are not self-made in a vacuum. You are awakening to the fact that what feels like you was pre-written in the flow of something that moves beneath time. Lately, those subtle signs have started to gather like breadcrumbs leading back to the truth. Deja vu no longer feels like mere coincidence. It's a pulse of coded recognition. The universe giving you a gentle nod that the program beneath is still active. Dreams that once dissolved with morning light now return with layers, like a kaleidoscope slowly turning to reveal deeper symmetry. Phrases in conversation show up 3 times in different places and suddenly make a thread you can pull. You notice physical sensations, an inexplicable tightening before truth drops, a warmth in your chest when you resist the urge to react the way you used to, a quiet clarity after a night when you used to wake confused but now wake knowing. There are recurring symbols in your life, not as manufactured signs, but as a language returning. The same number series, the same song lyric in moments that feel like crossroads, the same image replaying in various contexts until you finally hear its message. These early signals are gentle, not overwhelming. They invite you to lean in, not to panic. They are the first soft testimonies that the remembering isn't a romantic idea. It's an awakening in real time. You are not seeing shadows. You are beginning to read the code beneath what you once dismissed as noise. When that internal knowing begins to align with external confirmation, the sense of safety shifts too. You stop apologizing for the intuition that once scared you. Because you see it working, because a quiet voice that used to be drowned out now speaks with clarity that lands in your body before the world reacts. Decisions don't feel like leaps into darkness. They feel like steps on the ground you've already touched in vision. That confirmation is soft, like the recognition in a mirror of someone you've always belonged to but never acknowledged fully. You begin to trust the pull to pause, to speak, to leave, to stay, not because someone else labeled it right, but because the internal rhythm matches external echoes. This is the moment where resistance loses its power to derail, because the internal alignment is a compass that doesn't get confused by shaking weather. There is a quiet peace in realizing your earlier misreads were not failures of perception, but attempts at navigation with a map the world didn't hand you. Now the map shows, it seems, and your inner calibration confirms. You were right, and the timing of your moves was always part of the design. The deeper revelation shifts from what you are sensing to who you are underneath it all. You begin to understand that remembering is not becoming. It is recovery. The identity you thought was buried beneath cultural expectations, performance patterns, and survival adaptations is not something to build. It's something that has always been present, waiting for the dust of others' voices to settle so you could hear your own. There is an archetypal memory waking in you, a lineage of soul recognition that connects across lifetimes and whispers that this is not new work. It is a revival of a frequency. The old default of seeking approval, hiding sensitivity, or dimming intention was not the real you. It was protective layering over the core that now stirs, asking to be acknowledged. That core doesn't need to be invented. It merely needs to be remembered, accepted, and allowed to lead. There is a quiet, firm anchor in the realization that the pieces of your purpose were never missing. They were misframed. Now, as the original signal reasserts itself, your internal language shifts from "who am I supposed to be?" to "who was I always?" and the answering recognition is like a soft light spreading through corridors you once navigated in half darkness. Now, With the opening awareness spreading, the first activation clicks in not as pressure, but as permission. Your sensitivity is no longer something to hide. It is a tuned instrument that hears the faintest shifts in truth. The hunger that you once punished for being too much becomes the engine of discernment, guiding where and how you place your energy. The old attempts to mute intuition to fit in are replaced with a deliberate leaning toward it, a cultivating of that inner knowing as the kind of wisdom that doesn't just inform, it directs. You begin to say no without guilt, not because you become colder, but because your internal binary now filters what aligns and what distracts with surgical grace. The impulse to explain fades, replaced by the quiet confidence of acting from source. This is a slow step forward, where the awareness of all that has been ancestral opens into the choice to use it, to not wait for external approval, to move with the authority that comes from remembering, and to allow your internal calibration to begin shaping the world around you with subtle force. You're no longer just noticing the pattern. You're becoming the place the pattern flows through. You didn't stumble into this moment. The fact that you are hearing these words now, that the recognition is settled, is not a random alignment of attention. It's a threshold, and your arrival here is a confirmation that the current of time has bent to meet your readiness. The quiet that once felt like absence is now the space where your power has been incubating, and the years of seeming delay were the precise intervals needed to refine the signal. Comment inside if you feel that the clarity you're beginning to carry isn't something you invented, but something you've been waking up to, a remembrance of the intelligence embedded in your soul. Share the moment that shifted for you, the dream that began to make sense, the pattern you finally recognized as purposeful. Hold that insight like a key, because what comes next is how you use that inherited sight to pull back their curtain without announcing it. Turn their confusion into the backdrop for your rise. And if you feel called to go even deeper, there's a sacred space reserved for our community, a private room where you receive full prophetic messages daily. Join our private membership through the link in the description and walk this path with us. Number 2, appearing slow to reveal truth. They rush to speak, to react, to perform. You held back. That holding back wasn't indecision. It was strategy rooted in the internal law you carry. While they were busy exposing themselves with loud moves and surface-level claims, you collected patterns, tested frequencies, and watched them reveal their weaknesses through their own momentum. Ecclesiastes tells us to do whatever your hand finds to do with all your might. Your quiet preparation gave your hand the leverage their noise never achieved. They thought your delay was hesitation. It was calibration. When they tried to set traps based on visible behavior, you had already adjusted because you saw the underlying narrative shift before it played out. Their self-exposure became your confirmation. Their overreaches turned into markers you used to refine timing. And their false urgency created the space for your true precision to land. In their rush to explain and be seen, they left themselves vulnerable to the stillness of your observation. And that stillness made their exposed games collapse without drama. Comment strategy if you've learned that appearing slow, let their own patterns betray them. The next piece reveals how your alignment doesn't just see, it preempts and clears the path, making their tactics imminent before they fully form. The first moment it settled and wasn't a headline event. It was a small, almost invisible shift, like a whisper under static. You noticed that when you didn't rush to answer, explain, or perform, the noise around you started unraveling on its own. Conversations that were meant to entrap or provoke lost their sharp edge when you stayed quiet. People who were primed to push their narrative ahead of scrutiny ended up exposing their own fractures simply by trying too hard. There was a strange pattern. The louder they got, the more you saw the seams of what they presented, and the slower you moved, the clearer the trajectory of their overreach became. That heaviness you once felt when others called your pace hesitation was actually a pressure against a system used to fast reactions, an instinctive resistance from those who wanted you playing their scripted speed. That initial discomfort was a moment the game's design began to show. Your delay wasn't passive. It was a break in their rhythm, and their instinctual response to fill the silence revealed their dependence on exposure instead of truth. It felt isolating, like being in a room where everyone expected you to perform on their cue while your internal timing beat to a different drum. You heard the words too slow, overthinking, missing opportunities. While inside, each pause was a calibration, a quiet test of what would sustain rather than what would flash. The emotional weight of being misunderstood, by people who measure readiness by volume pressed in, you began to doubt whether your inner rhythm was weakness. Shame crept in when you saw others move fast, get noticed, and get rewarded superficially, while your strategic stillness made you invisible on the surface, even though you were watching, processing, and adjusting with depth. That cycle, feeling like you were failing because you weren't performing their urgency, then punishing yourself for not being louder, created a tension that drained the edges of your clarity. The isolation wasn't because you were less capable. It was because you weren't participating in their fabricated tempo, an emotional pressure that mislabeling nearly made you trade your quiet advantage for their noisy approval. Then you began to see that the resistance was not random discomfort or personal failure. It was the pushback of deeper structures reacting to the way you moved outside their tempo expectations. There is a sacred echo in the wilderness journeys of Scripture, a place of testing where the obvious path is stripped and what remains is refined. Habakkuk 2 verse 3 says the vision waits for its time. It hurries to the appointed end and will not delay. That delay is not deficiency. It is divine pacing. The pressures, the subtle sabotages, the forced timelines others impose on you were often their attempt to drag you back into a script where you could be predicted, controlled, and used for their visibility. The quiet strategy you held was a form of resistance, not loud rebellion, but ancient endurance. Systems built on reaction fear subtlety, because it doesn't play by their predictable beats. Your slowness exposed the cracks in their tempo, and their attempt to accelerate you revealed their dependency on the illusion of forward motion rather than aligned movement. Looking back, the patterns are undeniable if you allow the clarity to settle in. The people who insisted you hurry were the ones who later faced fallout for acting without the depth you now see. Those opportunities they shouted about collapsed into traps because the momentum was built on surface-level urgency, not internal alignment. The betrayals that landed hard often came in the wake of their own overcorrections. When they sense hesitation in you, they push harder, and in doing so they expose their desperation to control the narrative. The environments that drained your energy were filled with voices trying to overwrite your timing with their demands, and each time you held still, their losses became your markers. That slow reveal was a regret. It was protection. Your past retreats weren't failures of courage. They were survivor instincts allowing you to gather the full story while others expose their strategies too early. This turning on of light moment is not accusation. It is confirmation. You begin to understand that what looked like missed chances were actually windows that would have broken you if opened too soon. As the clarity settles, something becomes visible beyond the social and emotional dynamics, a kind of spiritual interference that had been clouding your path whenever you try to move on someone else's timing. The air around certain situations thickened unexpectedly. Ideas that clarity dissolve into fog when you try to force their outward expression, and doors that seemed like they should open slammed shut with invisible pressure. At times you felt watched, not with hostility that could be named, but with a tension that made your energy compress, as if unseen currents were attempting to redirect you into the faster flow of their design. This was not external sabotage in simple terms. It was energetic misalignment imposed by narrative constructors who could not read your internal law. So instead they tried to drown it out with distraction, urgency, and emotional pull, your light, because it didn't conform to their timing. Attracted distortion, not as punishment, but as a calculated interference from systems built to keep their version of truth steady. What seemed like random setbacks now revealed themselves as pressure points strategically placed to see if you would bend to their rhythm or maintain the deeper cadence within you. You reacted as anyone would when faced with tension between internal integrity and external assault. Sometimes by shrinking, other times by trying to match the speed and failing, and often by internalizing their labels. You reminded yourself you were too sensitive, too slow, too cautious, because it was easy to try to correct yourself and to admit you were being subtly manipulated into their frequency. There were seasons of people-pleasing, hiding your timing so you could fit into their boxes, then brief rebellions where you tested boundaries and felt to push back hard enough to retreat again. That inner dance is not weakness. It is survival adapting to opacity. The fear of standing out, of being seen as abnormal for not jumping on their timeline, kept you muted in moments where your quiet hold could have held the line. But in those half reactions and partial withdrawals, something else was forming. A recognition that the resistance, once fully felt, wasn't a signal to change yourself. It was a mirror reflecting what you were being asked to protect. That emotional mirror allowed truth to surface. You weren't wrong for slowing down. You were wise, and your internal economy was recalibrating. The first shift toward reclaiming begins when the weight of their pressure turns into fuel instead of burden. The realization lands like a charge. Their rush to expose became your vantage point. Their urgency became the rhythm you learned to outlast, and their attempts to draw you into their pace revealed their reliance on surface moves, exposing how easily their momentum collapses when not mirrored. Now, the slowness wears armor. Your pause becomes prophetic timing. The things they used to call your hesitation are reframed as strategic placement, and the voice inside that once questioned if you were missing the moment now affirms that you've been creating the space for the right moment to land. You begin to voice with intention, not from reaction, reclaiming back the authority they tried to steal by confusing speed with progress. This is not a soft awakening. It's a handing back of something they push you away from. Your innate ability to control tempo, to see their overextension in real time, and to use their noise as data instead of distraction. The slowness, once hidden, becomes a declaration of mastery. The truth settles. They oppose your pace because your timing exposed their flaws. The faster they moved, the easier it was for you to see the edges of their imitation. And in that seeing, your quiet hold amplified their instability. You were not blocked because you lacked momentum. You were blocked because your presence forced the false structures to reveal themselves too soon, and they reacted by trying to speed you, dilute your cadence, or shame your rhythm into their own. That opposition was proof of your alignment, not a punishment for it. Your delay was a barrier they couldn't bypass, and their attempt to push you into their tempo only made your emergent truth clearer. Comment strategy if you felt the pressure turn into clarity. If you now understand that your slowness let their own patterns betray them and gave you access to what they were trying to hide. What comes next is not just seeing their tactics, it's moving beyond them entirely, preempting their next move, clearing their interference, and stepping into the kind of influence that doesn't require explanation but simply unfolds because you've aligned your timing with the law beneath their noise. And to every soul who supported with a super thanks, thank you. You are keeping this light alive for others who haven't found it yet. If you feel called to help this mission reach more chosen ones, tap the super thanks button below. Your energy supports these messages and helps them travel further. Your voice matters, and your light is felt here. Number 3, seeing beyond facts. The world trains people to react to what's visible. You've been learning to perceive what's beneath and beyond. There's a difference between gathering data and having an internal lens that interprets intention, and that's where your spiritual discernment lives. You feel when motives are shallow, when someone is wearing a version of truth to mask a different aim, and when a situation is being primed to distract. Amos 3 verse 7 reminds us that nothing happens without a revealing to the ones who listen. Your role has been to observe the signs they try to hide, to decode the energy before it becomes noise, and to act with authority that doesn't need to argue its validity. When they try to frame you as oversensitive or paranoid, what they really fear is that you've learned their surface logic and slipped into the deeper stream where their manipulation no longer works. Your calm isn't absence of engagement, it's preemptive clarity. Their narratives fall apart not because you counter them loudly, but because you move from a place that has already looked ahead and adjusted the trajectory. Comment clarity if you felt this internal edge sharpen, and add a personal reflection about the time you recognized deception before it was spoken, or how a quiet knowing saved you from walking into someone else's script. The tension builds because their confusion becomes an unintentional spotlight on your alignment, and what comes next is the power of your presence making the hidden visible without needing to strike. Something shifts inside, an internal lens recalibrates, and what used to feel like static noise begins to separate into pattern and purpose. That moment arrives like a soft thunder, a sudden clarity that makes past confusion feel less like error and more like a prelude. You find yourself pausing differently, not because you're uncertain, but because you're seeing layers where before you only sensed surface. A conversation that would have once passed as harmless now carries the weight of intent. A casual compliment reveals underlying strategy, and the things you couldn't name begin to name themselves. The world trained most people to trust what's loudest, but you are waking into the quiet architecture behind the clamor. That internal shift isn't a new skill being learned. It's a revealing of a deeper sight that was always present, playing out in hindsight as prophecy. The fog that once blurred motive and meaning thins, and the edges of truth sharpen, not because you've added something, but because you're finally allowed to see what was always there. All around you, the language of reality begins to speak with new cadence. Numbers that used to pass as coincidence now land like punctuation marks in a sentence you hadn't known was being written about you. Dreams offer recurring symbols that no longer dissolve upon waking, but turn into threads you can pull, revealing a woven story beneath daily happenstance. Phrases echo in unexpected places, not as random echoes of culture, but as aligned refrains guiding you toward pattern recognition. The geometry of timing, the divine math of synchronicity, hums beneath the surface. Every alignment, delay, and too soon was never arbitrary. It was coded communication. You begin to read the quiet scrolls of energy in the pauses between words, the spaces where others see silence. There is a secret grammar to the way events arrange themselves. And the more you lean into that language, the less the chaotic noise of external timelines distracts you. This isn't mystic fluff. It's a new literacy. You are becoming fluent in the symbolic system the universe has been using to guide you all along, and with that fluency comes the ability to discern the false narratives that try to mimic the real. Inside, the signs intensify. What used to feel like a flicker of intuition now arrives with the weight of calibration. Your inner boundaries, once porous under pressure, conform, raised not in defense but in alignment, making you less available to projections that don't belong to your frequency. Energy responds differently when you enter a room. Where before you might have absorbed and adapted, now you sense dissonance early, and your body acts as a gauge, subtly shifting to protect the emerging clarity. The pull to explain yourself decreases because your inner knowing starts to match external echoes. The gut check that used to feel like insecurity now hums with quiet authority. The refining process they can't name is happening. Your tensions aren't breakdowns, but internal tuning. Your resistance to false pressure isn't stubbornness, but a calibration of what deserves your field. The sense that something in you is becoming clearer, whether in the way you instinctively sidestep manipulation or the way truth reveals itself before your mind catches up, is confirmation, not theory. You are not guessing. You are witnessing the deepening of an internal spectrum that already sees beyond what others take at face value. As your perception expands inward, the outer world begins to reflect it in resonance. People shift in subtle ways around you. Those who once tried to pull you into their narratives now hesitate, because your alignment has made their scripts feel flat. Opportunities appear not by random chance, but as invitations keyed to the new frequency you carry. Some doors open easily, others resist briefly, and then yield, marking the divine architecture adjusting to the clarity you embody. Resistance, too, shows up like a shadow revealing the form of light. It no longer blinds you but maps where the edges of the control try to hold, giving you coordinates to move from. Alignments that once required effort now feel like the natural unfolding of paths that have been waiting for you to recognize their contours. The timing that once felt delayed now lands with purpose. The moment you act is mirrored by shifts in your environment, because what was within you has become a directive waveform, and a world designed to respond to deeper law rearranges an echo. This isn't coincidence, and it isn't luck. It's a visible reflection of invisible alignment beginning to anchor in reality. A memory stirs, not of something you experienced for the first time, but of something you once knew before words gave it shape. There's a dream you carried, perhaps dismissed as fragment, where you stood at a threshold and heard a voice saying the world would realign if you remembered. Now that dream becomes language. The symbols that haunted your sleep no longer feel random but like forgotten alphabet waking. The cadence of your inner knowing reconnects with an ancient current, and the identity beneath the layers of adaptation recalls its original rhythm. It's like finding a map folded into the back of your own heart, one you've been searching for in pieces, only to realize all along it was engraved there in the quiet. The sacred memory isn't nostalgia or fantasy. It is a return of the primal code. What you first interpreted as isolated sensitivity or eccentric intuition was the echo of this remembering moving through terrain that had been numbed by the demand for external proof. Now, as the memory reactivates, it pulls your present into coherence with a lineage of purpose that predates your current timeline, making the unfolding not new creation but restoration. The future, suddenly, doesn't feel like something to chase. It feels like something that's been waiting for you to reclaim your name. What was once framed in your mind as a permission to be earned is now understood as an inheritance to step into. The story you've been told about needing validation from outside systems softens, and in its place rises a quiet proclamation. Path and destiny were not given to you from without. They were remembered from within. The idea of asking for permission becomes obsolete because the call originates from the core of your identity, and it carries the weight of prophetic inevitability. You have been lined up with something that does not bend to human timetables. What you now choose is not creation from scratch, but unveiling from depth. This is the moment where the internal call becomes public decree, not with noise, but with presence. And the doubt that once kept you waiting for a green light is replaced with the authority to step because you recognize the light already carries your signature. Resistance, once heavy and confusing, now becomes fuel as reclamation begins. What they try to hide, distort, or delay in you reveals itself as the very source of the power you now wield openly. The whisper that told you to quiet down, not to rock the boat, to stick with the safe script, that voice is replaced with fiercer recognition. You are not wrong to wait. You are wise to observe, and you are now inheriting the agency they hope to silence. The internal authority that hesitated earlier because of their fog now returns with clarity sharpened by survival. You begin to speak not from reactive defense, but as prophetic declaration, naming what you carry, the discernment, the sight, the ancestral current, and press it back into the world with the grace of one who no longer seeks permission, but offers alignment. Their confusion, their attempts to explain you are dissolved by your presence because the energy you reclaimed is no longer negotiable with their old definitions. This is a hand back of what they try to take. Your voice, your timing, your law. Revelation is not completion. It is initiation, the moment you see beyond the facts. You are invited into a deeper level of embodiment. The truth you've tasted has been waiting for the readiness of your courage to receive it, and the unfolding is now a call to act. You were targeted because you carry a frequency that destabilizes their structures. It's why they try to define you, distract you, or dismiss you. The more they push against your clarity, the more that pressure sculpted the edges of your purpose. Comment clarity if you felt the veil lift, and share a personal reflection. Name the dream that started to make sense, the moment you sensed motives before they were spoken, or the challenge that turned your sensitivity into strength. This is a hinge point. What comes next isn't just presence making the hidden visible. It's your hidden become the field to which others are awakened, and the next revelation will pull that visibility deeper into the structure they built, turning their exposure into the stage for your influence. Number 4, how presence breaks false systems. You don't have to fight the structure they built. You simply stand, and it cracks. Their systems rely on noise, distraction, borrowed approvals, and manufacture momentum. Your presence, quiet and aligned, doesn't compete with that noise. It makes the cracks visible. Light has always exposed what was built in darkness, and your calm clarity is the kind that forces their constructs into reflection. They try to maintain control by doubling down on narratives, but the moment you occupy space without over-explaining, their house of cards tilts. The architecture of false authority begins to show its seams when you refuse to play into their theater. People around you start questioning what they once accepted, and their own confusion becomes a canvas on which your alignment paints truth. John's writing about light tells us that those who do what is true come into the light, and the light exposes what was hidden. Your existence alone initiates that exposure. Comment presence if you've seen systems that once seemed invincible begin to falter simply because you held still and didn't validate their story with reaction, and share a memory of the moment their confidence slipped when your quietness held firm. Their attempt to label or minimize you only widens the cracks, and next you'll see how the expansion of that visibility turns their scrutiny into a stage for your legacy, not their control. The crossroads is quiet but undeniable. There is a moment when watching becomes choosing, when an internal mirror no longer asks permission from the outside world to reflect truth, but demands alignment from the self. You are standing in that moment now, between the old reflex to explain, perform, or defend, and the new impulse to simply occupy your space and let the structure around you reveal itself. The decision is not about doing more. It is about being more precise, more present. Their systems have trained you to believe you needed to fight, to shout louder, to prove the light in you. That lie falls away here. The question that lands like a blade and clears fog is this: will you keep reacting to their narrative, or will you stand still long enough for weight of your presence to crack it open? The threshold isn't a dramatic leap. It's the quiet suspension of your old identity and the deliberate stepping into a role where your calm no longer hides. It exposes. Passivity is over. The choice now is to embody the truth you've seen and let what was built on borrowed noise collapse under its own inconsistency, because you stopped feeding it with validation. You've given pieces of yourself away in the name of harmony, survival, and being reasonable. Time surrendered to the rhythm others set, energy diffused into their dramas, voice softened to avoid being labeled difficult, presence diluted to blend in. The ledger that season is heavy only if you misread it. It wasn't failure, it was training ground. This is the moment to call it all back. Declare internally what was lost in translation. Reclaim your hours, your silence, your strategic pauses, the weight of your field that once bent to accommodate their tempo. Speak it aloud in the quiet ritual of your own making. I take back my presence. I take back the space I deferred to their noise. This reclamation is not a plea. It is a reclaiming of a throne already prepared. What you ceded to soothe their discomfort or to earn approval now returns as a force that no longer negotiates but commands. The season of bending is over. Your authority was never diminished. It was simply held in waiting while you learned how to bend nothing. Now, in fierce yet focused clarity, you draw back your influence and seat yourself in the law you've mastered by endurance, not by applause. Name what lives in you. The stillness they misread as absence is actually your code. Insight distilled from pain, sensitivity honed into radar, memory turned into map, discernment sharpened by silence. You are not carrying weaknesses. You are carrying keys, scrolls, and armor. The things that made you feel too exposed in rooms where others played masks are the exact tools that now protect and guide. Your intuition is a fire that doesn't consume randomly but illuminates with precision the structures built to control. Your clarity is a set of carved runes embedded in your story that unlock doors others have been banging on with loud, empty gestures. The calm you hold is not neutrality. It's calibrated energy, sacred weight that compresses inconsistencies until they fracture. This is a language of the chosen. Every pause is a code, every refusal a declaration, every movement a carrying forward of ancestral law. They try to flatten you into metrics. You are a composite of encrypted strength, and the tools you've been given are exactly what is required for what's next. The path ahead is no longer something distant or mysterious. It's the ground beneath your feet, rearranging itself with every aligned step. You don't need to hunt for direction. The clarity you've earned now manifests as movement. Simple acts, intentional choices, and measured presence that reveal the map as you walk it. The scenery shifts because you shift. The next coordinate is always visible in the ripple of your own alignment. This is cinematic not because of spectacle, but because of momentum born from truth. Imagine walking through a desert that once stretched endless, and suddenly the dunes shift into a corridor carved by your own steps, guiding you without the need for a compass you were told to follow. The mission doesn't appear as a new burden. It clicks into place like a gear engaging the rest of the machine that's been waiting for your activation. What seemed like waiting was preparation to reign, and what seemed like delay was a slow unfolding of a route that holds integrity, not compromise. Your presence now carries direction, and the world bends around the signal of your faithfulness, echoing forward what you've already declared inwardly. You are not the only one whose silence became sight, whose waiting became sharpening. Look beyond the edge of your own rise, and you'll see the subtle ignition of others, soul tribes pulling into alignment, divine clusters where frequency meets frequency and amplifies instead of dilutes. There is a rising order of those who have been taught to dim, to hide, to perform in borrowed light, now choosing to burn in their own clarity. The collective is not a crowd. It is a network of intentional presences, each holding a note of truth, each signal reinforcing the others. The old structures that demanded assimilation are dissolving, and your refusal to soften your beam to fit their fading spectrum strengthens the emerging grid. This is a higher coordination, a mutual recognition that your mission is entangled with theirs, not by accident, but by design. You don't need to wait for the invitation. You are the invitation. The awakening of one pulls forward the awakening of many, and what once seemed like isolated brilliance now becomes a constellation, guiding those still lost in their own controlled narratives. The order is rising, and your alignment is part of its scaffolding. Take command of the energy you've been stewarding in fragments and assemble it into intentional dominion. This is not about ego. It is about sacred stewardship. You've been entrusted with a frequency that disassembles falsehood simply by holding truth steadily. That trust carries responsibility. Boundaries are not walls to isolate but gates to protect the field. Choices are not indecision but declarations of alignment. Devotion is not blind loyalty to an external figure but consistent fidelity to the inner law that reveals what is real. You are in ceremony now. Every adjustment of who you let in, every pause before reacting, every refinement of focus is an act of consecration. You pour energy not into maintaining image, but into proving alignment. You withdraw from drains and invest in currents that respond to your calibrated presence. This is the stewardship of light that doesn't burn uncontrolled, but carries warmth and illumination to the places still conceptualized by old structures. The energy you keep becomes sacred, and the way you distribute it writes new codes on what was previously assumed unchangeable. Everything you felt, the doubt, the exile, the sensations of being misunderstood, the pressure to perform on someone else's terms, has led you to this moment of readiness. There is no more room for hesitation disguised as humility. The internal narrative that once asked, "Am I enough?" now dissolves under clarity that says, "I am exactly what was prophesied, and my timing aligns with the law behind their confusion." You are ready. That readiness isn't conditional on external validation or the crumbling of old systems around you. It is declared from within and echoes outward, making the portal ahead less of a leap and more of a crossing already paved by your alignment. The fear that whispered to you to stay invisible so you wouldn't be targeted dissolves into a proclamation. Your visibility is the pressure point that causes decay in their false constructs, and your emergence is the affirmation of their impending collapse. This is a final breath before stepping through the threshold, the moment where the internal charge becomes external decree. Stand in that, move from that, speak from that. The revelation doesn't end with seeing. It begins with embodiment. You were not meant to carry this quietly forever. This is your summons. The field you inhabit now is a channel that will pull others in, not with manipulation, but with the exposed resonance of truth. Comment presence if you've seen systems crack under the weight of your quiet alignment, and share reflection. Name the moment the control slipped when you held still, the dream that confirmed your mission, or the inner knowing that pushed you to stop explaining and start standing. This is the hinge. Their scrutiny becomes a background for your legacy, not a cage. What's next will deepen how that visibility expands. How what they call exposure becomes a framework through which your influence rebuilds the order they tried to conceal. This is a clearing. What you've seen, felt, and remembered now turns into what you carry forward with quiet precision. You are chosen not because you fit their expectations, but because you see what they can't, move where they stall, and expose what they hide without having to shout. Subscribe if you haven't yet, like this video, and comment, "I am chosen," to let this message anchor in your soul. This message may not stay online forever. Download your copy and transcript in the vault. Ideal for journaling, inner rituals, and sacred study. The link is in the description below. Please, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Thank you to all supporting members. 4 full prophetic revelations daily. Join the membership via the link in the description. Your spiritual path deserves more than fragments. Step into the full light. And if this message moved you deeply, consider tapping the Super Thanks button to support the mission. Every super thanks fuels the light we're spreading together. Keep watching, keep moving, and keep revealing what they try to hide.